Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to be looking at something that might sound a little bit dry, but I promise it's really important. The connection between inventory turnover and obsolescence.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can really sneak up on businesses.
Oh, absolutely. And we've actually got some really interesting sources for this one. We've got articles, a company website, even a personal blog post. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but it all ties together really well. So our mission today, to help you understand exactly what inventory turnover is and how it all connects to accounting for obsolescence, and importantly, why you really can't afford to ignore this stuff.
Yeah, we're going to go beyond just the definitions and really kind of dig into what it all means.
All right, so let's get into it. First things first, what is inventory turnover? And why should we care? Isn't it just like how quickly you sell things?
Well, yeah, it is about how fast you sell things, but it's a little more than that. Inventory turnover really measures how efficiently a company is at selling and then replacing its inventory over a specific period of time, usually a year. It's like, taking the pulse of your business.
I see. And a lot of our sources talk about efficiency, but I really like the analogy that I saw in Control the Inventarios. They compare inventory to a bank account.
Ah, yes. That's a great way to think about it. Your inventory isn't just products just sitting on shelves. It's all tied to your cash flow, just like the money you have in the bank. And a high turnover rate, well, that means your money is moving. It's working for you, generating revenue. But if you've got a low turnover, well, that's like having just a stagnant bank account.
Right. Makes sense. So basically, if my inventory is turning over pretty quickly, things are selling well, that means my business is healthy.
Generally, yes. I mean, it usually suggests that you're not overstocking. Your products are in demand, but you always have to consider the context.
Right.
For example, in that Rotazione Inventario article, they talked about this bicycle factory that had a turnover rate of 4 for finished goods. That means they sold and then replaced their entire stock of bicycles 4 times during the year.
For 4 times?
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds pretty impressive, I have to say. But how do you even calculate that?
It's actually a pretty simple formula. You take the cost of goods sold and you divide that by the average inventory value. So in the case of this bicycle factory, they took their total cost of all the bicycles that they sold and divided that by the average value of their inventory, over the entire year.
Okay, I see. So a turnover of 4, is that like good, or is that just kind of average?
Well, that's where you have to look at the benchmarks for your industry. So let's say that the average turnover for bicycle manufacturers is 6. Well, then that factory might want to think about some strategies to boost their sales or look at how they can optimize their production, get that number up.
Interesting. So it's not just about the number itself. It's about how it compares to everyone else who's doing what you're doing.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of obsolescence comes in.
Okay, so now that we have a better idea of what inventory turnover is, let's talk about that problem of obsolescence. A couple of our sources, Optimizing Slow-Moving and Obsolete Inventory and Control the Inventarios, they both talk about what happens when products become outdated, and it's not pretty.
No, it's really not. Obsolescence can really hurt a business's bottom line. When you have all this inventory that's obsolete, it ties up your capital, it's taking up valuable space, and it can even force you to write it off completely, which then impacts your financial statements and everything else.
It's not just about the numbers on a spreadsheet, though, right? Like,
right.
This can lead to actual losses, right?
Yeah.
Like, you might have to sell things at a huge discount just to get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just one way that obsolescence can affect your profits. So now let's see how this ties back to inventory turnover.
Okay. So are we saying that a slow turnover rate could be like a warning sign? Like, hey, watch out for obsolescence.
Yeah, it could be like a canary in a coal mine. If your products aren't moving quickly, they're much more likely to become obsolete.
Makes sense. Because the longer something just sits there on the shelf, the greater the chances that it's just going to become unwanted or outdated.
Exactly, yeah. And controlled inventarios, they have this really helpful way of explaining this risk. They talk about these different inventory categories. They have uso frecuente, which is for things that are used all the time, then aseguramiento, which is, your safety stock, and then uso específico, which is like for specific projects. And for each category, they have these time-based obsolescence percentages.
So, like, items in that uso frecuente category, maybe they have a 0% obsolescence rate for the first year, But then if they don't sell, then that percentage starts to go up.
Exactly. Think of it like the stuff you always reach for first in your pantry. You know that's your uso frecuente, and there's a very low risk that it's going to become obsolete. But then there's those spices that you bought for that one recipe, like years ago. Well, those might be heading into that uso específico category with a much higher obsolescence risk.
Okay, that's a great way to think about it. So that makes it much clearer, how that works. But how can businesses, how can they predict, how can they manage this whole obsolescence thing? It seems like it's kind of a moving target,
Well, that's where it's really important to understand the connection between inventory turnover and accounting for obsolescence.
Okay, so it's not just about keeping track of how fast you're selling stuff. It's also about how you actually account for the risk of those things becoming obsolete, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to the concept of a provision or a reserve for obsolete inventory. Controlled inventarios talks about this, and it's a really critical accounting practice.
So if I'm running a business, why should I care about this whole provision thing? Like what does it actually mean for my business?
Well, it's about being prepared. A provision for obsolete inventory is basically just a certain amount of money that you set aside specifically to cover any potential losses from obsolete inventory, like creating a little bit of a safety net.
Okay. So as a business owner, am I supposed to just guess how much to set aside? It all seems very, very complicated.
There are a few different ways to actually calculate this provision, and yeah, it can get pretty complex, but it's not just about randomly picking a number. There's a process.
Okay, so I was looking through some of these sources, and they talk about using your historical data, looking at, trends in the market, even talking to experts in your industry. It's almost like a combination of art and science.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. You need to look at your past data, consider everything that's going on in the market right now, and yes, sometimes you even need to get input from experts to make sure you're setting aside a reasonable amount.
But wouldn't setting aside all this money make your profits look worse, at least on paper?
I mean, yeah, it's true. Creating a provision will reduce the profit that you report, which, might seem kind of counterintuitive at first, but it's actually a more accurate way to reflect the health of your business. It's acknowledging that, not everything you have in your warehouse is going to sell at full price, and it helps you avoid any nasty surprises later on.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of a trade-off then, right? Like looking good in the short term versus being, honest and prepared for the long term.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Being transparent and accurate when you're reporting your financials, well, that builds trust with your investors and your lenders. And ultimately, it's what helps you to stay stable in the long run.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm really starting to see how this whole connection between inventory turnover and accounting for obsolescence is really important,
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process. You have to constantly be monitoring things, analyzing your data, and then making adjustments based on what's going on with your specific business and your industry.
Right. It's like this constant balancing act between making sure that your inventory is moving and also making sure that your books are telling the truth about what you actually have in your warehouse.
Exactly. It's all about staying ahead of the game. And speaking of staying ahead of the game, let's talk about some of the strategies that businesses can use to manage inventory turnover and this whole obsolescence thing.
Yeah, let's get practical. Our sources have some great advice and real world examples that we can look at.
Yeah, for sure. Rotación de inventario, it goes back to that bicycle factory, and it also talks about a furniture factory and an electronics plant to kind of show how different industries face different challenges,
Right. So like that bicycle factory, they'd have to focus on, matching their production with seasonal demand,
yeah.
Right? And then the furniture factory, well, they'd have to make sure that they were using durable materials. And then the electronics plant, well, they'd have to be really, really on top of all those technology changes because things can become obsolete so quickly in that industry.
Exactly. And so, every industry needs to kind of figure out what works for them. And then, ¿cómo minimizar las pérdidas por obsolescencia en el inventario? That article has some really good tips on inventory analysis.
So basically, before you even think about ordering more stuff,
yeah,
you need to really look at what you already have and see what's selling, right?
Right. Analyze your sales data, figure out what's not moving, and then adjust your purchasing. Don't just keep ordering the same stuff if it's not selling.
Yeah, and it sounds like forecasting is really important too. Como minimizar. They emphasize that a lot, right?
Oh, absolutely. Forecasting is key. It helps you to get ahead of demand so you know how much to order and when. And this is also where having good relationships with your suppliers can really help.
You mean like, working closely with the people who are actually supplying you with the materials?
Yeah, exactly. When you have those close relationships, you can get more information about lead times and potential problems and even, new products that are coming out. That way you can adjust your orders and lower the risk of getting stuck with obsolete inventory.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's really about communication, right? Like all throughout the supply chain. But what happens if what if you already have a bunch of slow-moving inventory? Like, is it a lost cause?
No, not at all. Optimizing slow-moving and obsolete inventory. That article has some really creative ideas. One of the key things they talk about is having a SESLO KPI. It's just a metric that tracks slow-moving and obsolete inventory.
So you're basically just like shining a big light on those problem areas, right? Like,
Yeah.
here's the stuff that's not moving.
Exactly. And once you know what you're dealing with, you can start to look at some different ways to get rid of it, like discounting, bundling things together, or even just donating things to charity.
Yeah, I love those ideas.
Yeah.
It's not always about making a profit. Sometimes it's just about getting rid of stuff and minimizing your losses. Rotación de Inventario, they also had some good advice about how to improve turnover for raw materials and the things that are still in process.
Yeah, that's another really important piece of the puzzle. Obsolescence isn't just about finished products. Raw materials can become obsolete too.
Oh, right. So like those parts that are just sitting in your warehouse, waiting to be put together, those can actually become obsolete if the design changes or if some new technology comes along.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to keep things moving through the whole production process. You don't want anything to get bottlenecked.
So we've talked about how to prevent these problems and how to fix them once they happen. But let's be realistic for a second. What if a business just totally ignores inventory turnover and obsolescence? What does that look like? What's the worst that can happen?
Well, ignoring this stuff, it's kind of like trying to sail a ship without a compass. It's not going to end well.
Okay, so I'm ready. Give me the scary details.
Well, first of all, you're going to have financial losses, right? Write-offs, missed sales, and in the end, lower profits.
Okay, yeah, those are the obvious ones. But I'm sure there are other things that can happen too, things that maybe aren't so obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. When you neglect your inventory, it can really start to affect how efficient your whole business is. Imagine you have a warehouse that's just overflowing with inventory that's not selling. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Oh yeah, I can see how that would be a nightmare, like logistically.
Exactly. Your employees are wasting time looking for stuff, trying to deal with things that have expired or gotten damaged. The whole warehouse is just chaos. And then that slows down your orders, which makes your customers unhappy, and it just spirals from there.
It's amazing to me how something that seems so, financial, like on the surface,
Yeah.
can affect every single part of your business.
It really shows how connected everything is. And we haven't even talked about how this can damage a company's reputation.
Oh, right. If a company is, always running out of stuff, or if they're known for selling stuff that's outdated, well, people are going to lose trust in them.
Absolutely. Your reputation is so important. Customers have choices. They can go somewhere else if they don't think you're reliable, or if they think you're not up to date.
Yeah. This is pretty eye-opening. So ignoring inventory turnover and obsolescence, it's not just a little mistake, right? It's something that can really cause a lot of damage, and sometimes that damage can be hard to come back from. You got it.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, and it's clear that managing inventory turnover and keeping an eye on obsolescence it's really critical. It's not just about the numbers. It's about being smart and making decisions that are going to affect your whole business.
Yeah, it's really about finding that balance, keeping your inventory lean and agile, but also making sure you have enough to meet demand. And all the while, you've got to be aware of that obsolescence ticking away in the background.
It really is a constant balancing act. And we've seen how ignoring this can have some pretty serious consequences.
Oh, for sure. The companies that are really proactive about this, about managing their inventory turnover and obsolescence, well, they're the ones that come out on top. They're the ones that have more capital to work with. They're running more efficiently. They're more profitable, and they have a real advantage over their competition. I like that you mentioned that competitive advantage because this isn't just about what's happening inside your business. It's about, positioning yourself to be better for your customers and to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. When you're managing your inventory well, you're making sure that you have what your customers want when they want it. It's almost like, another form of customer service.
Okay, so one final thought for our listeners before we wrap up this deep dive. We've been focusing on businesses, but how can people listening to this apply this to their own lives, to their own work?
That's a great question. What's really interesting is that a lot of these same ideas can be applied outside of just business. Think about your own personal inventory, right? Like your skills, what you know, who you know, your network. Are you investing in the right things? Are you making sure that what you know is relevant? Are you taking care of your relationships?
I like that. Can you talk a little bit more about how that applies to, just personal growth and development?
Sure. I mean, it's all about being really conscious of what you have, what you need, and what might become obsolete, as time goes on. It's just like in business. You have to look at your personal inventory and make adjustments. Are there skills you need to learn to stay competitive? Do you need to meet new people to create new opportunities for yourself?
So it's like taking stock yourself and then coming up with a plan to manage all of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you actively manage your inventory, you're increasing your value, you're creating more opportunities for yourself, and ultimately, you're setting yourself up for success.
That's great. It's like we've cracked the code here. This is the secret to success in everything. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of inventory management. We hope you've learned a lot, and maybe you've even come away with a new appreciation for just how important inventory turnover and obsolescence really are. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.